"Just die already, old man." The words detonated across the waiting room like a slap. Harsh, unfiltered, venom laced with volume. Chairs creaked as heads turned. A child dropped their juice box. The hum of the overhead light suddenly felt too loud, too bright. The air itself seemed to pause. She stood there, mid-aisle. Tiffany Lang, early 30s, dressed in a sleek mustard sweater, her phone clutched in one hand, the other jabbing the air like punctuation. Her face was twisted in disbelief, not at herself, but at the audacity of the man who dared sit silently in front of her. The man in question didn't even look up. Master Gunnery Sergeant Alvin Grizz Rowe, 88 years old, sat hunched in a sea of molded plastic chairs. His back was curved by time, his breathing shallow but steady. A paper-thin hospital wristband clung loosely to one wrist. The other gripped the edge of his walker, knuckles white with age. He wore an old olive cardigan over his hospital gown, neatly buttoned. A trio of medals pinned carefully to the fabric winked under the sterile lights. A weathered notebook rested in his lap, thumbed open to a page where only 2 names were written. He blinked, once. Slow. That was all. Tiffany kept going. Her voice rang louder now, her rage made bold by silence. "Why are you even here? There are people with real issues. Stop wasting everyone's time and go die with your little pins already." A woman near the coffee station dropped her cup. A nurse behind the counter slowly rose to her feet. A man in scrubs clenched his jaw but said nothing yet. Still, Alvin did not react. He shifted his left hand, just slightly, and rested it atop the notebook. His eyes remained lowered, his expression unreadable, but something moved. From across the room, a nurse, her eyes locked on Tiffany, reached for her phone. No expression, just a message typed and sent in 4 seconds. Outside, the wind picked up. A low hum grew in the distance, tires rolling, heels clicking, a faint metallic clink in rhythm. Not alarms, not voices, boots, 12 of them, marching in sync, and they were coming through the doors. The morning began long before the sun claimed the sky. At exactly 5:30, Alvin Rowe's eyes opened to the stillness of his small room at the Veterans Assisted Living residence in Fairmount Hills. He lay there for a moment, listening. The distant murmur of a hallway television, the muted hum of an elevator rising 1 floor below. His breath, slow and patient, was the first thing he always counted. The second was memory. He sat up with a small grunt and reached for his slippers. The left foot always gave him trouble now, but he never complained. With practiced care, he slid on his cardigan, the one with the reinforced elbows Loretta had sewn in years ago. He ran a hand down its front until it settled against the ribbons pinned there. He straightened them with his fingers, not for show, but for honor. Outside his window, the sky was still charcoal, the edges of dawn only whispering against the horizon. Alvin moved slowly toward the wooden stand in the corner where a folded flag rested beside a single matchbox and a slim metal pole. Every morning, without fail, he walked to the small patch of grass behind the building to raise the stars and stripes. It took him longer these days. His knees protested. His right shoulder sometimes forgot how to lift past a certain angle. But by 6 go, the flag was up, and Alvin stood back from the pole with his hand at his brow, holding a salute for 10 steady seconds. 1 for every decade he'd lived. Nearly. The air was crisp. A bird chirped somewhere unseen. Back in his room, he brewed coffee. Real coffee, not the pale stuff they served in the dining hall. He ground the beans himself. The sharp, earthy scent filled the modest space, pushing back the sterile scent of linoleum and sanitizer. He sat at his small kitchen table, stirring sugar into the cup slowly, eyes resting on the photo nearby. It was Loretta. In uniform, her cap tilted just slightly, her smile that crooked little smirk he had fallen for the moment he met her at a United Service Organizations dance in 1958. She'd been Army medical. Tougher than anyone in his unit, he always said. He touched the frame gently. A sticky note beneath it read in tidy block letters, "Follow-up appointment, 11:30. The day had purpose. Alvin liked that. After breakfast, he headed out early. Not for himself. His friend Curtis, 2 years younger but twice as forgetful, had a biopsy scheduled at the hospital. Curtis hated hospitals. Alvin had promised he'd sit with him in the waiting room just in case. No one should wait alone, not for things like that. The staff driver was late, as usual. Alvin didn't complain. He waited at the pickup loop, one hand resting on his walker, the other holding the leather notebook he kept tucked under his seat cushion. It had names in it. Too many, really. Names of men who served beside him, died beside him. Some he saved. Some he couldn't. A sedan honked at him as he stepped from the curb. The driver inside didn't see the veteran sticker on his walker or the medals on his chest. Just an old man in the way. Alvin gave a faint nod, barely reacting, and moved along. At the hospital, the receptionist was polite, but distracted. She barely looked up when she gestured toward the crowded waiting room. "We're a bit backed up today," she said. "Might be a while, okay, buddy?" He gave her a small smile. Not everyone learned names. Inside the waiting room, the air was thick with body heat and impatience. A child watched cartoons too loudly. A woman tapped aggressively on her phone with the volume on. Someone coughed into a tissue they kept stuffing into their pocket. Alvin helped Curtis into a seat near the far wall and then took the one beside him. He unfolded the notebook and added a date beside a name. That was his tradition. Every time he stepped into a hospital, he remembered one more Marine. Curtis nodded off within minutes. A nurse passed by with a clipboard, barely glancing at the pair of them. Alvin didn't mind. The moments belonged to him. Until Tiffany Lang walked in. She burst through the sliding doors like a gust of winter wind. Brisk, loud, and carrying the storm behind her. She was younger than most in the room, in good health from the look of her. Dressed in fashionable layers, carrying a tablet under one arm and a designer tote over the other. Her boots clacked loudly with each step, and her eyes scanned for something to complain about before she even sat down. Alvin noticed her glance his way. Her brow creased. A scoff escaped her lips. He didn't look back. He closed the notebook. Outside, the sky was clear, bright now, but a storm was quietly forming just beyond the glass doors. 12 sets of boots had crossed the lobby, and they were heading toward the waiting room. The waiting room had grown quieter, but not calmer. Some appointments were being called. Others were not. Tension drifted like static, not seen, but felt in the shoulders of the elderly, in the restless tapping of teenagers' sneakers, in the occasional cough swallowed too quickly. Tiffany Lang had made her presence known long before she opened her mouth again. Her movements were fast, exaggerated, a dramatic shuffle of her handbag, a slap of her phone against the armrest, a sigh that belonged more on a stage than in a hospital. Alvin noticed, of course, not the volume of her behavior, that he could ignore. It was the pattern, the huffing, the side glances, the flicker of eyes that kept returning to him like a finger pressed on a bruise, the way people sometimes look when they see something that reminds them of their own impatience with time. Curtis snored lightly beside him, mouth parted, one hand curled over his knee. Alvin didn't wake him. He simply reached over and adjusted the edge of the old man's coat so it covered more of his lap. From across the room, Tiffany suddenly stood. "This is ridiculous." Her voice was sharp, loud enough to invite witnesses, not just attention. "We've been here forever," she said to no one and everyone. "And I guarantee you half of these people are just here to get out of their retirement homes." A nurse walking past slowed her step. Alvin didn't move. His eyes had settled on the corner television, where a muted news report showed grainy footage of a military ceremony. He couldn't hear it, but the posture of the saluting men told him everything. "I mean, look," Tiffany scoffed, gesturing openly toward Alvin. "I swear he hasn't moved in an hour. Is he even breathing?" No one responded. That silence, however, was louder than she expected. A man near the window lowered his paper slightly. A mother drew her child a bit closer. The nurse paused just outside the corridor and glanced toward the front desk. Tiffany didn't stop. "This is what's wrong with this place," she continued. "You give priority to people who contribute nothing. I work full-time. I pay insurance. But let's roll out the red carpet for someone collecting a pension from a war nobody even remembers." Alvin's fingers gently rubbed the corner of the leather notebook. He didn't open it this time. His lips pressed together, not tight, but firm, like someone holding back the ocean. "Bet he fakes half of it," Tiffany muttered to herself, but loud enough to be heard. "They all do. Limp around, flash some shiny metal, and everyone calls them heroes." A little girl, no older than 8, turned toward her mother and whispered something. The mother shook her head. The girl whispered again, glancing at Alvin, her brow furrowed. Tiffany heard it. "Oh, please," she snapped. "I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." She laughed then, a hard, forced sound. Her phone dinged with a notification, and she began scrolling again, lips curled in frustration. From the hallway, the sliding door whispered open. No one noticed at first. A nurse, young and fast-moving, stepped in briefly and walked straight to the receptionist. Their exchange was quick, heads low, eyes scanning the room. Behind them, a shadow moved across the frosted glass. Still, Tiffany hadn't stopped. "Seriously?" she barked suddenly, rising to her feet. "Why is he even here? If you're that old and broken, what are you doing hogging the waiting room? Why don't you just—" She didn't finish the sentence. Not this time. She was cut off by a sharp chorus of bootfalls echoing through the corridor. 12 of them, clean, measured, approaching. The sound was unmistakable, not the erratic clatter of visitors or the shuffle of doctors on rubber soles. This was cadence. This was tradition. This was the sound of Marines. Tiffany's voice caught mid-sentence. The room stilled. Alvin sat quietly, eyes now lowered to his lap. But something had changed in his posture. The slightest shift in spine, a tilt of chin, a stillness that felt more like presence than withdrawal. Curtis stirred beside him, blinking sleep from his eyes. Then the doors opened. The first to enter was tall, clean-shaven, blue dress uniform pressed to perfection, white cap tucked under one arm. His boots stopped just short of the waiting room floor's center line. Behind him, 11 others followed, shoulder to shoulder. Not a word spoken, not one wasted motion. The youngest among them held a folded flag beneath one arm. Another carried a small framed photo, and one, near the end of the line, carried a trumpet case. No one asked who they were. No one had to. Tiffany backed toward the wall, color draining from her face. Her fingers tightened around her phone, but it had gone dark. The lead Marine looked to Alvin. "Permission to approach, Master Gunnery Sergeant Rowe," he said quietly. Alvin finally looked up. His eyes shimmered. He gave a single nod. The sand tasted like blood. He hadn't meant to fall forward, but the blast had come from somewhere left of the ridge, tearing through the column ahead, flipping the lead Humvee like it was paper. Alvin hit the dirt just behind the second vehicle, one hand thrown instinctively over his face. His left boot was on fire. He didn't realize it yet. Iraq, 2 decades earlier. Not his war, not really. He had already retired years before. Twice, in fact. But when command had called him in for consulting on convoy logistics in Al-Anbar, he hadn't hesitated. They needed someone to oversee one of the riskier desert runs. He said yes before they finished asking. What he hadn't expected was to be riding in the middle of it. The air was thick with smoke and diesel. His ears rang, a high, screaming whistle that turned everything else into shadow movement and mouth shapes. He rolled, once, extinguishing the flame on his leg, then pushed himself up on one elbow. There was shouting ahead. He couldn't hear it clearly, but he saw the flare of gunfire. The convoy had stalled, 2 trucks immobilized, one burning. A sandstorm rising in the distance, like a curtain of copper. Then he saw the boy. Private Carr, 19, bright teeth, terrible handwriting. Alvin had sat with him 2 nights ago over lukewarm coffee, talking about girlfriends and grilled cheese and how scared the kid was of not being brave when it mattered. He was trapped under the back axle of the lead Humvee. The wheel well had collapsed, pinning one leg beneath twisted metal. His helmet was gone. Blood trickled from his forehead, running in tiny rivers down his cheek into the sand. Alvin crawled. Every joint screamed. Shrapnel had kissed the left side of his face. He could feel the warmth trickling down his temple, but he didn't stop. His palms sank into the sand with each move forward, fingers clawing against terrain that wanted him to stay down. Carr screamed. The gunfire came again, closer. Alvin reached him, pressed a hand to the boy's shoulder. "Stay with me, Private." The kid's mouth moved, but no sound came. His eyes were wide and wet. "Hey," Alvin said again, louder this time. "You're not dying today. I made a promise. No Marine left behind." He braced both arms against the axle. Grit lodged in his teeth as he pulled. It was impossible. The metal didn't move. But he adjusted, twisted his shoulder underneath, and began leveraging weight with a grunt that came from the bottom of his soul. Something shifted. The vehicle groaned. Carr's leg came free. The scream that followed was raw, human, awful. Alvin grabbed him by the flak vest and dragged him back, inch by inch, over broken glass and searing sand, blood dripping from his jaw into the dirt. Behind them, a second explosion flared. The burning truck belched fire into the sky. But they were moving. Carr gasped, still alive. Alvin pulled him until they reached the base of the nearest barricade, where another soldier, wide-eyed, barely shaving age, crouched behind a wall of sandbags. Together they lifted Carr over the last few feet and rolled him behind cover. Then Alvin slumped against the wall, his arms shaking, the desert spinning around him. One medic would later tell him the blast nearly took his hearing permanently. Another said the cut on his cheek needed 17 stitches. But none of that mattered. The boy lived. He would go home. And Alvin, in silence, had earned another name for the notebook. Back in the present, his thumb absently grazed the leather binding. In the waiting room, one of the Marines stepped forward. It was Private Carr's son. The lead Marine took one step forward. His boot stopped just inches from the edge of the old linoleum tile that divided the waiting area from the corridor. Behind him, 11 others stood in formation, backs straight, eyes fixed, the hospital hum now silenced by the weight of their arrival. The entire room watched, frozen. Tiffany Lang stood against the far wall, her phone still in hand, but lowered now. Her breath caught somewhere between defiance and disbelief. Her earlier words echoed in her ears, cruel things, barked in frustration, and now they sounded alien. The lead Marine raised his chin. "Sir," he said gently, his voice deep but reverent, "you saved my father." A breath caught in someone's throat. Alvin blinked slowly, looking at the young man. A strong jawline, dark eyes, the same subtle ridge on the bridge of the nose he remembered from the boy's father. Private Carr, 19, bleeding in the desert. Alvin's own scars ached at the memory. He gave the Marine a slow nod, then, just as slowly, began to rise. It took time. Curtis tried to help, but Alvin held up a hand. His legs trembled, but he stood on his own, one hand gripping the walker for balance, the other tucked over his heart. The Marine stepped closer. "I'm Staff Sergeant Jeremy Carr," he said. "My father told me what you did. He would have died out there, and I would never have been born. I was just a baby when you pulled him from that convoy. He never talked much about the war, but he always talked about you." Jeremy's voice cracked. He inhaled through his nose and steadied it. "You trained him, saved him, and honored him. Today, I stand for him." Then quietly, he turned to the Marines behind him and gave a single nod. One by one, they stepped forward in pairs. Each man saluted Alvin. No words, just gesture. One knelt. Another handed Alvin the folded flag. A third, trembling slightly, said, "He was my mentor. He always said your name with respect." A woman in scrubs brought Alvin a chair. Not because he asked, because they couldn't bear to see him strain. He sat, shoulders straight, hands resting on the flag in his lap. No one dared speak. Then came the sound. Not boot falls now, not the beep of hospital monitors. A voice, steady, baritone, rising. The Marine in the center, older with silver at his temples, began to sing. The others joined, their voices rising around Alvin in solemn harmony. No lyrics needed. The melody was ancient, sacred, a hymn known by heart, a song born of oceans and war and prayer. The sound moved through the walls, filling every inch of space. Alvin's eyes closed. His fingers gripped the edge of the flag, knuckles pale. Then slowly, one hand rose. He saluted. The Marines saluted back, all 12, as one. At the reception desk, a nurse pressed a hand to her mouth. A father pulled his son gently to his feet. The boy stood beside him and copied the gesture. Hand to brow, eyes locked on Alvin. The room stood still. Tiffany said nothing. Her back remained against the wall. Her mouth open, but the words had left her. All she could do was stare at the man she'd tried to erase and watch as a sea of honor flooded in behind him. She tried to lower her eyes, but Alvin's gaze was no longer soft. It wasn't angry. It was resolute, and it was looking right through her. The final note drifted upward, then down again, like a slow ripple across water. It did not stop all at once. Each Marine held the harmony a moment longer than expected, just enough to feel the air around them thicken with silence. No applause, no reaction but breath and heartbeats. Even the hospital television had gone dark, its static flickering out as though bowing to the moment. Alvin's hand lowered slowly from his salute. His fingers trembled just slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what had just passed. He looked from face to face, Marine to Marine, letting his gaze rest on each man who now stood where he once had, a generation forward, a circle unbroken. Staff Sergeant Jeremy Carr stepped closer, kneeling at Alvin's side. "My father always said," Jeremy murmured, "you were the reason he made it home. He didn't talk about that day often, but he never forgot your name. Said you were the bravest man he ever met." Alvin's mouth parted, a slight trembling breath. Then came a faint smile, the kind that rose only when pain and pride touched at once. That was all. Behind him, Curtis, now fully awake and alert, wiped under his eyes with the back of his hand. His lower lip quivered, but he smiled. "Told him you still had it in you," he whispered. The little girl from earlier stepped forward again. She didn't speak. She simply approached Alvin with the slow, deliberate care of a child entering a sacred space. In her hands was a small pack of stickers, the kind doctors give out after checkups. She peeled one off, a gold star, and gently pressed it onto Alvin's wrist, just above the edge of his sleeve. Then she stepped back and saluted again. Alvin looked down at the sticker. He chuckled softly, just once. Across the room, Tiffany had not moved. Her face had changed. Not only the shade, which had drained to pale pink, but the expression. Her eyebrows, once arched with irritation, had lowered. Her jaw, once tight with defiance, now quivered at the edges. She opened her mouth, closed it. The Marine with the trumpet case stepped forward, knelt beside Alvin, and placed the closed instrument gently at his feet. A symbol, not a performance. Then he rose and returned to formation. A nurse, the same one who had sent the first text, now approached Tiffany. Quietly, she placed a folded piece of paper in Tiffany's hand. "We honor everyone here," she said, "but disrespect has no place in this building. You'll need to speak with administration." Tiffany did not respond. Her fingers closed around the paper. For once, the phone stayed silent. Back near the front desk, the receptionist clicked open a file on her screen. The screen read, "Patient note, Alvin Rowe, honor protocol initiated." Curtis leaned over, nudged Alvin gently. "You ready to go home, Grizz?" Alvin smiled, but shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "Still got a name to write down." By afternoon, the story had already begun to move beyond the walls of the waiting room. Someone had recorded part of the moment, not the confrontation, but the aftermath. 12 Marines standing in quiet formation, a frail man saluting with a hand that trembled, and a little girl pressing a gold star on his wrist. It wasn't loud, it wasn't staged, but it spread like fire through dry fields. At the hospital's administration wing, meetings were held behind closed doors, then quickly reopened. A press statement was issued before dinner time. "We deeply regret the incident witnessed earlier today in the general waiting area. Effective immediately, the facility is designating a reserved veterans-only lounge, staffed with trained personnel and scheduled for monthly recognition services. No veteran will wait in silence again." The change wasn't just a courtesy, it was a reckoning. Local media picked up the story. 12 Marines stand for one. Hospital honors forgotten hero. At the center of it, a photo, not of the confrontation, not even of the Marines, but of Alvin, sitting with a small sticker on his wrist, a folded flag in his lap, eyes half closed in silent reflection. In the days that followed, visitors increased to the veterans' wing. Children brought drawings, local choirs came to perform. One middle school sent handmade cards, each one beginning with, "Dear veteran, thank you for everything." And what of Tiffany? She wasn't fired. She was reassigned, temporarily, to work in the hospital's veteran outreach program, not out of punishment, but because someone believed she needed to listen more than she needed to speak. At first, she was quiet. Then she began asking questions. One morning, she helped serve breakfast to a group of 3 veterans in wheelchairs. One of them, a man with only one hand and a sharp wit, asked her gently, "You ever seen what a man looks like when he's 20 and scared?" She didn't answer, but she stayed longer that shift. Back at the assisted living facility, Alvin received a letter. The return address was from Jeremy Carr, postmarked Camp Pendleton. Inside was a photo, a newborn swaddled in a red and gold blanket, asleep, a faint smile on his lips. Below, a handwritten note. "His name is Alvin. Thought you should know." It was early again, the kind of morning that rose slow over the rooftops, casting long shadows that reached like memories across the garden path. The assisted living home was still quiet, breakfast trays not yet clattering, the television in the rec room still silent. Alvin sat beneath the flagpole, the same place he raised the colors every morning before his appointment. This time, the wind did it for him, gentle, clean, rustling the flag just enough to make it dance against the sky. In his lap was the leather-bound notebook. He held a pen in one hand, the cap tucked into his palm. His fingers moved slowly now, joints swollen with time, but still firm when it mattered. One page was open. Near the top, neat rows of names stretched downward, some with dates, some with small notes beside them. Then, beneath the last of them, he wrote, "Jeremy Alvin Carr, July 12th, 2025, born free." He looked at the name for a while, smiled, then turned the page. Blank. Waiting. He didn't close the notebook. He didn't need to. It would remain open, like his days, like his duty. The garden around him swayed in the wind, sunlight filtering through the hedges Loretta once trimmed by hand. Curtis walked out with 2 mugs of coffee, held one out. "You already out here, Grizz?" Alvin nodded, took the mug. Curtis settled onto the bench beside him. "I heard the baby's name," he said. Alvin didn't answer. He just looked out at the flag, and in a voice barely louder than breath said, "There's always another name to carry." Curtis nodded. The camera would hold there for a moment. Not on the flag, not on the house, but on Alvin's face. Lined, weathered, scarred, but peaceful. Because sometimes the world does remember. And sometimes it remembers just in time. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice